We had a plan to colonize a new world, to start from scratch. We didn't even make it through the first year. It wasn't war. It wasn't famine. It was the planet itself, as if it knew we weren't welcome. Within weeks, all the adults were dead. Only the children remained, and those about to be born. It's been 6,000 years since then. This is what we've become. Subscribe for more journeys into the future. After the adults died, the colony was left in the hands of automated systems and a generation that did not yet understand the world in which it was growing up. Among those systems, some remained active for centuries. They were artificial gestation modules designed to ensure the continuity of the species in hostile environments. And they worked. While the first children grew up and learned to survive on the planet, those structures continued to generate new humans with more stable biological parameters. Organisms with less genetic variation, better adapted from the start, and with a lower failure rate in the face of environmental conditions. As generations passed, that difference ceased to be merely technical and began to be perceived as something essential. Two ways of being born. Two ways of existing. Those born naturally evolved with the planet, changing with it, adapting to its conditions generation after generation. Those born in gestation systems arrived already adapted, as if they had been designed not to deviate. What began as genetic optimization ended as a theocracy of the flesh. Those born in gestation systems were not only more stable, they were more beautiful, more symmetrical, more resilient. In the eyes of a generation of terrified orphans, they were not mere humans. They were the anointed. They were granted the status of divine beings, not for what they did, but for what they represented. The perfection that the planet could not corrupt. They became living idols. Like the gods of ancient Greece, they walked among mortals with a sacred distance. They were not allowed to work the land. They were not allowed to bleed. They were revered as the last pure link to the steel mothers. Society was built to serve them, to protect their genetics as if they were the species' most sacred treasure. Those born naturally accepted their role as guardians. They believed that, by caring for the anointed, they were safeguarding the very future of humanity. In that garden of steel, the hierarchy was not written in laws. It was written in awe of a perfection that no one else could attain. The seed of the first great conflict had been sown, not out of hatred, but out of a worship that, over time, would become suffocating. In the early years, survival wasn't a matter of evolution. It was a matter of imitation. Inside the ship were cultivation modules, seed banks, and systems designed to teach how to produce food in different environments. The children didn't understand what they were, but they could use them. Screens with simple instructions, programmed cycles, visible results. You planted like this, and it grew. They repeated that for generations. Without theory, without technical knowledge. Over time, those systems stopped working. But by then, they had learned enough. The first plants didn't survive outside the modules. The soil was different. The air was too. So they began to mix seeds from the ship with organisms from the planet. Trial and error for centuries. That's where the first stable crops came from. They weren't terrestrial, nor were they completely local. They were something else. Some were edible, others weren't. But they helped the rest grow. They learned what to touch and what not to, what to cut, what to leave alone. They didn't have agriculture as we understand it. They had areas where life thrived and areas where it didn't. Cities grew up around those areas, not because they were planned cities, because there was food there. The structures were simple at first. Shelters, layers, materials from the surroundings. Over time, they began to use organisms from the planet as part of the structure. Hard surfaces that grew if kept moist. Layers that insulated from the outside. Materials that regenerated. They didn't design buildings, they maintained living systems. The anointed didn't live in those zones. They were kept in more controlled spaces, near the mothers, with less exposure to the outside. It wasn't a privilege. It was another way of being in the world. The anointed didn't live in isolation, but they didn't occupy the same spaces either. Their zones were closer to the mothers, where the air was more stable, where changes arrived later. Not because they couldn't adapt, because there was no need. While the rest of the population worked in the active zones, where the soil changed, where crops mutated, where every season forced everything to adjust. They remained in areas where the system was already functioning. They were the ones who observed, the ones who noted patterns, the ones who sensed when something stopped fitting. When an area stopped producing, when a species began to fail, when the air changed prematurely. They were the ones who pointed it out. They didn't give orders, but they marked the moment. Their role wasn't to work the environment, it was to read it. That's why they were always present during major changes, at the opening of new areas, at the abandonment of those that were no longer useful, at moments when decisions had to be made with no margin for error. The rest kept the system running. They indicated when it would stop doing so. And over time, that defined their place, not as untouchable figures, but as those who saw before the others. On a planet where everything changes without warning, anticipating is everything. 6,000 years of adaptation have reshaped the limits of perception. To them, air is not a vacuum. It is a dense medium, laden with particles that irritate the throat and burn the vocal cords. That is why silence is not a choice. It is a tool for survival. They have developed a language that does not require air. They communicate with their eyes. Rapid blinks, dilated pupils, minimal eyelid movements that convey complex concepts in seconds. An entire conversation can take place in the blink of an eye, without a single sound. To an outside observer, they would look like statues. To them, it is a constant flow of information. But as their voices faded, their ears opened to the invisible. They have developed ultrasonic hearing. They do not hear the wind, they hear pressure. They can sense thunderstorms before they form. They feel the hum of static in the air as if it were a scream. To them, the planet is never silent. They hear the beating of tectonic plates, the flow of water in the depths, the movement of gas clouds in the upper atmosphere. They live in a world of vibrations. Their cities are designed to amplify these sounds. Structures that vibrate with the wind, warning of changes in air toxicity. Walls that resonate when the pressure drops. They don't need measuring instruments. They are the instrument. This is their normal. A world where speaking is painful, but where silence is filled with inaudible music. The anointed, sheltered in their bubbles, are deaf to this world. They live in an artificial silence, terrified by the noise they cannot understand. Meanwhile, on the outside, humanity has learned to listen to the language of the planet, a language that is not spoken, but felt in the bones. "6,000 years later, society has forgotten equality. At the pinnacle, there are they, the anointed. They are not leaders who dictate laws from a throne. They are the axis around which reality revolves. Everything that happens in the colony has a single purpose: to ensure that the existence of the anointed is not extinguished. Beneath this divinity of flesh, the organization is a choreography of survival. There are no political offices. There are biological needs that dictate who is in charge at every moment. The listeners are the guardians of the threshold. Their ultrasonic ears detect storms before the sky changes color. When they give the signal, the pyramid closes. Work stops. The air is sealed off. Everything is sacrificed so that the anointed's rest is not disturbed by the chaos outside. But the god's peace comes at a price of blood. In the colony's mythology, it is believed that the ancient gods gave their lives so that the children might survive. Now, the anointed demand the same to maintain the balance. When the terraforming nodes run dry, when time stands still and the machines cease to hum, the anointed demand a sacrifice. It is not an execution, it is a return to the code. The best are chosen from among the children of the soil, the strongest, the youngest. It is believed that their life force is needed to nourish the steel mothers through the anointed. A sacred exchange, a human life for a harvest cycle, a life for a truce with the storms. The anointed preside over these rituals from their glass bubbles, impassive, cruel, living in abundance while the rest are consumed in the mud. They do not go hungry. They do not breathe the irritating air. Their well-being is the measure of the world's health. If an anointed one is satisfied, it is believed that the planet will be merciful. If an anointed one shows contempt, the colony prepares for death. It is a hierarchy of terror and fascination. Those below surrender their blood so that the center may continue to shine. Those above accept that blood as the fuel necessary to keep the artificial sun from going out. A civilization that has ceased to build empires, to become a sacred slaughterhouse that worships its own executioners. Six 6,000 years of order do not end with an explosion. They end with a doubt. The first crack did not appear in the ship's metal. It appeared in the silence of those who served. It began as a whisper among the sons of the earth, a question no one had dared to ask in 60 centuries. Why? Why do we continue to hand our children over to the Mother Mountain? Why do the anointed continue to live in the light while we waste away in the dust? Faith, which had once been the glue holding the species together, began to rot. The trigger was a drought that the rituals could not stop. An anointed one walked across the fields, spilled his sacred blood, prayed to the machines. And nothing happened. The earth remained dry. The steel mothers remained silent. For the first time in 6,000 years, fear was replaced by contempt. The workers stopped kneeling. Metal offerings began to run short, not for lack of resources, but for lack of will. If they are gods, they whispered in the shadows, let them save themselves. The tension became palpable. Small acts of sabotage in the pipes that carried fresh air to the sanctuaries. Defiant glances that the eye weavers could no longer hide. The anointed, locked in their perfection, began to feel something their genetics had not taught them to handle. Terror of their own brothers. They saw how the doors of their glass bubbles began to be pounded from the outside, not by external enemies, but by the people who had loved them for millennia. The documentary ends at that moment of peak tension. With the Mother Mountain vibrating under the weight of a silent revolution. With the anointed gazing through the glass at a crowd that no longer prays, but waits. We don't know what happened next. We don't know if there was a massacre or a new beginning. We only know that on that day, humanity ceased to be a colony of obedient orphans, to become a species that was, at last, willing to kill its gods in order to survive. 6,000 years of history end here, on the edge of the abyss, where metal meets flesh, and the silence is broken forever.